If you have a honey jar in your kitchen, take a close look at it. Close enough. No, do it again. Because the truth is simple, the danger in honey isn't the sweetness you taste. It's the details you never notice. A single line like blend of EU and non-EU honeys tells you almost nothing about where it came from. A perfectly clear golden color can mean filtration so aggressive that every trace of pollen, the very thing your immune system depends on, is gone. And an organic label can sit on a jar that has traveled farther, been heated harder, and offers fewer natural enzymes than you'd ever expect from something we call pure. When your body passes 50, those missing enzymes matter. Those unstable sugar ratios matter. And the false comfort of a clean, glossy label can nudge your blood sugar, your digestion, and your inflammation in ways you can't feel until much later. So today we're opening 5 jars that raise more questions than answers. Don't panic, because we also have 2 you can trust right now. 1 Tesco Stockwell & Co. Clear Honey. Tesco Stockwell & Co. Clear Honey makes its argument in the first second you turn the jar. The shine, the smoothness, the single-tone gold, they feel reassuring. But with honey, perfect appearance often means something has been taken away. And with this jar, the clues begin with the label, Produce of China, packed in the United Kingdom uniform from top to bottom with no trace of crystal or cloud. That surface beauty creates an expectation of purity. Yet the more transparent a honey becomes, the more you should ask what has been removed to reach that state. Natural honey is never identical from batch to batch. It carries flecks of pollen. It thickens in cooler seasons. It shifts in tone depending on what the bees touched. When all of that variation disappears, the most likely explanation is heavy filtration, not natural perfection. Why does this matter? Pollen is not decoration. It is the marker of a real floral origin and the sign that a honey carries its natural fingerprint. Remove it, and you remove the evidence of where that honey came from, how it was produced, and what nutritional properties remain. Without pollen, the honey loses its identity. More importantly, for older bodies, it loses the substances that support digestion, soothe inflammation, and help modulate everyday immune response. Filtration on this level also affects enzymes, especially diastase, which declines sharply when honey is pushed through fine filters or processed at higher temperatures. When enzyme levels fall, honey behaves less like a natural food and more like a simple syrup. The shift is subtle, but the consequences are not. Enzymes help slow the sugar hit. They support antioxidant activity. They make honey feel steady in the bloodstream rather than sharp. Remove them, and the body receives sweetness without balance. For a person over 50, that balance matters. Blood sugar flexibility is not what it once was. Any product that loses its natural buffering effect can leave the body working harder for the same teaspoon of sweetness. That can mean mild energy, dips, unsettled digestion, and a small but steady rise in inflammatory load. Not dramatic, not immediate, but cumulative. The kind of change you only notice after weeks, not minutes. Look again at the jar's behavior. Rotate it, and the liquid moves with an even glossy slide. Natural honey thickens in places. It forms slow waves. It resists movement. Tesco's Stockwell honey glides as if engineered for convenience. That smoothness is pleasant on toast, but raises questions about what parts of the honey's original structure were stripped away to achieve it. A honey that has lost its complexity will taste sweet, but it will not support the body in the way many assume honey should. Another sign sits in the consistency. Clear honey that remains unchanged through all seasons usually indicates a product designed for uniformity rather than authenticity. Bees do not work to keep color constant. Factories do. And when consistency becomes the goal, filtration becomes the tool. None of these details make the honey unsafe. They make it less than many shoppers believe. The gap between reputation and reality widens quietly between a label that sounds familiar and a product that no longer carries the qualities people associate with real honey. Tesco Stockwell & Co. Clear honey is the kind of jar many households buy without hesitation. Yet once you understand what is missing the pollen, the enzymes, the natural variation, it becomes difficult to call it nourishing. You get sweetness and only sweetness with very little of the depth that gives honey its long-standing value. 2 Waitrose Essential Squeezy Honey. Most people grab this bottle without a second thought, trusting the Waitrose name to mean steadiness, safety, and some level of ingredient honesty. But the moment you flip the jar and find the line blend of honeys from more than one country, the entire picture changes. Because once honey loses a single place of origin, it also loses the stability your body depends on to manage sugar digestion and inflammation, especially after 50. This is not a small detail. When honey comes from scattered regions, the floral mix varies wildly. Sugar ratios shift. Natural acids drift. One batch might feel mild, and another might hit your bloodstream harder. That inconsistency is the first risk. Not a dramatic danger, but a steady push on a body that needs predictability, not surprises. And while the sweetness tastes familiar, the internal effect can feel entirely different. An uneven glucose bump followed by a softer dip, a little more tiredness, a little more digestive strain. Nothing alarming in the moment, but real enough over months. The issue becomes clearer when you look at the system that creates this blend. Multi-country honey does not simply arrive in the UK as a finished product. It passes through brokers, traders, bulk handlers, and processors whose job is to mix smooth and level the flavour until it tastes the same every time. That might suit convenience. It does not suit authenticity. And every step between the hive and the shelf increases the distance between the consumer and the source. In that distance, natural complexity thins out. The floral identity becomes vague. The pollen map fades. The enzymes weaken through repeated handling. By the time the honey reaches a British supermarket, what you hold is less a food born of a landscape and more a product arranged by supply decisions, pricing pressures, and seasonal availability. The label tells you none of this. It only gives you the final line blend of honeys from more than one country. Why does this line exist at all? Because it carries no requirement to name the countries involved. A jar might contain honey from 3 places or 5, or a shifting list that changes depending on market price. The shopper sees a Waitrose logo. The body receives a moving target, and the company remains fully within the law, offering a product that meets food safety rules without offering the clarity many people assume is built into the brand. This raises a quieter but more important question. If a supermarket knows its customers trust the brand, why leave the origin this vague? It may not be about hiding danger, there is no claim of that, but it can be about keeping options open. Flexibility in sourcing means cheaper supply, faster blending, easier smoothing of flavour. But each layer of flexibility comes at the expense of the one thing honey relies on: traceability. For older bodies, that matters. A honey with unknown floral diversity and fluctuating sugar balance forces the digestive system to adapt, repeatedly pushing insulin response to adjust over and over. You might not feel it immediately, but you may feel the pattern unsettled stomach, mild post-meal drop, or that drifting afternoon fatigue that arrives sooner than you expect. Not panic, just erosion, slow, steady, and unnecessary. The ethics sit in that gap. When a food long associated with purity becomes a global mixture with limited transparency, the promise between brand and shopper weakens. The question is not, is it safe? The question is it honest? Because a label that avoids naming its sources tells you something about priorities, and none of those priorities center on your physiology. And this is only one kind of fog. The next jar on our list hides behind another phrase, a legal wording that looks straightforward but reveals even less. Let us open that one next. 3 Morrison's Pure Clear Honey, The jar of Morrison's pure clear honey looks ordinary enough, steady colour, familiar shape, the word pure placed where you expect it. Yet the moment your eyes reach the line blend of EU and non-EU honeys, the entire meaning of the label shifts. This is not the origin. It is not even a hint. It is a classification so broad it splits the world into two halves and tells you nothing about where this honey has actually been. When a food relies on wording this wide, the question is no longer, what is it, but what path did it take? Honey that moves across continents seldom travels directly from a beekeeper to a UK shelf. It passes through a sequence of handlers, brokers, storage depots, processors, blending facilities. Each one introduces a stage where the honey can be warmed, held softened or reworked to make the final mixture more uniform. None of these steps must be listed. The law only requires the final packer to apply this two-zone phrase, and the jar meets that rule without offering any deeper insight. As a result, the chain of custody becomes a blind spot. A jar may hold honey that spent months at one temperature, weeks at another, and hours in a blending tank before reaching the UK. Heat applied during any stage affects enzymes. Time spent in large containers dulls natural aroma. Repeated handling weakens the compounds that older bodies rely on to support digestion and reduce inflammation. These changes do not announce themselves with a flavour shift. They slip beneath your awareness, and by the time the honey reaches your kitchen, its nutritional edge may have already faded. This is simply how long-root honey behaves. It is sensitive to both heat and storage duration. As natural components decline, the body receives sweetness with less balance and less support. Over weeks and months, that can mean slower recovery, after meals, less stability in blood sugar, and a softer response to everyday inflammation, changes subtle enough to overlook, yet meaningful enough to matter. The phrase on the Morrison's label covers all of this. It confirms legality. It confirms that the product is permitted for sale. It does not comment on the number of intermediaries, the conditions of storage, or the methods used to blend multiple batches into one consistent result. By the time it reaches the shelf, the journey may be more complex than the jar suggests, and the word pure no longer describes the path, only the packaging. Other foods must work harder to be transparent. Olive oil lists its country. Coffee names its region. Specialty teas point to gardens or estates. Honey, however, can mix numerous sources under a single regulatory phrase, and the system allows it. This is not wrongdoing. It is convenience. And convenience shapes choices. It reduces cost, stabilizes, flavor fills shelves, and smooths logistics. But each gain comes with a trade-off. The identity of the honey weakens, and the buyer receives no window into how the product was handled. For anyone over 50, traceability is not a luxury. It is a form of protection. A jar that has travelled through many hands without acknowledging that journey cannot offer the reassurance many shoppers assume. What remains is a sweet, pleasant product with a label that promises more simplicity than the process behind it ever allowed. For Sainsbury's SO Organic Clear Honey. For many British households, Sainsbury's SO Organic Clear Honey carries an automatic sense of reassurance. The word organic feels like a shortcut to safety, to quality, to something closer to nature than the cheaper jars on the lower shelves. It is the kind of product people buy for comfort tea in the evening, toast in the morning, a small spoon stirred into warm water for digestion. Yet none of these things tell you what happened to the honey before it reached your kitchen. Organic rules in the UK focus mainly on farming practices, the bees, the forage area, the absence of synthetic pesticides. But those standards say almost nothing about post-harvest handling, and that is where the gap begins. Organic honey can be heated, blended, strained, and stabilized, just like any other honey. And when a jar remains liquid through every season and behaves with the same consistency day after day, it usually indicates heat treatment, not natural steadiness. Why does that matter? because heating honey reshapes it from the inside. Enzymes weaken. Diastase, one of the most sensitive enzymes, drops quickly with exposure to high temperatures. HMF levels rise as the honey browns at a microscopic level. The floral signature becomes faint. The protective compounds many older bodies rely on, especially those linked to digestion and inflammation, lose strength. What you get in the end is honey that still qualifies as organic, but no longer carries the natural support people assume comes with the label. For someone over 50, that difference is not academic. The body becomes more reactive to sugar, more sensitive to inflammation, and more dependent on foods that offer balance rather than just sweetness. A spoon of honey that has lost its natural buffering effect hits harder. It asks more of your metabolism. It delivers less help to the stomach. And over months, it contributes to that slow rise in daily tension. Stiffer mornings, shorter patience for rich meals, and a little more fatigue settling in sooner than expected. Yet the jar never warns you about the heating. It does not have to. The organic certification focuses on the field, not the factory. This creates a strange situation. The label that looks most trustworthy is often the label that tells you the least about what the honey endured on its way to the shelf. And because British shoppers associate organic with maximum care, few people stop to consider that the very process used to make the honey easy to bottle, easy to spread, and easy to sell may have stripped away the qualities that made it worth choosing in the first place. There is also the matter of convenience. Supermarkets prefer honey that does not crystallize quickly, that stays smooth in warm stores and cool kitchens, that holds flavor without shifting. Heating solves those problems instantly. It simplifies logistics. It reduces customer complaints about grittiness. It speeds up processing. None of these motives are malicious. They are practical. But practical steps have consequences, and in the case of organic honey, the cost is usually paid by the person expecting nourishment, not just sweetness. This leaves one uncomfortable truth: organic tells you how it was farmed, not how it was treated. And when treatment undermines the very nutrients people are paying a premium for, the label becomes a badge with less meaning than shoppers believe. 5 Aldi Everyday Essentials Honey. Walk down the honey aisle and you will spot this jar almost immediately. Aldi places it right at eye level, bright, simple and inviting. It looks good. It looks straightforward. And it is cheap, astonishingly cheap. Around £1 for a jar of warm, sweet honey. Intriguing, right? A deal that feels too good to question. A deal that almost invites you to take 2 instead of 1. But this is where the trouble begins. That low price is not a gift. It is a signal. A jar of honey cannot cost less than a cup of coffee unless something in the process has been trimmed, stripped, or softened to make the numbers work. And when you look closer at honey sold at this range, a single pattern appears again and again: deep filtration and extensive processing, not to improve quality, but to make the product easier, faster, and cheaper to move through the supply chain. Filtration may sound harmless, yet it changes the honey more than people realize. The more aggressively honey is filtered, the more pollen disappears. And pollen is not there for decoration. It carries floral identity, mineral traces, natural enzymes, and the subtle compounds older bodies rely on for smoother digestion and slower sugar release. Remove those elements, and you remove the depth that allows honey to nourish rather than just spike sweetness. What remains after intense filtration is a liquid that behaves like honey but acts like fast sugar. It touches the tongue softly, then hits the bloodstream sharply. For someone over 50, that matters. Your body no longer regulates glucose with the ease it once had. You feel rises more quickly. You fall faster afterward. Afternoon energy dips deepen. The stomach gets less help. The joints feel a little tighter. No warning label on the jar will ever tell you this, but your body will. There is another cost. Filtration is often paired with blending to maintain uniform taste. A jar that must be sold at a rock-bottom price cannot vary from batch to batch, so processors standardize the flavor. Standardization sounds clean. It is not. It means removing uniqueness, flattening the edges, and reducing everything that once made honey a living product from a landscape, not just a sweetener from a factory line. This is how a low price is engineered, not by generosity and not by efficiency alone, but by taking out the parts of honey that are costly to preserve complexity, origin identity, the pollen that proves where it came from, the nutrients that justify choosing honey over refined sugar. Strip away each layer and the cost falls. What you hold in your hand still looks like honey. The label still calls it honey. The law still allows it to be honey. But the function, the support, the calm energy most shoppers expect from honey fades away long before the jar leaves the warehouse. The uncomfortable truth comes into focus here. Cheap honey does not mean the company is sacrificing profit for your benefit. It means they have found a formula that keeps the price tag attractive while keeping the margins intact. They are not cutting prices for you. They are cutting the product for themselves, shortening the path, thinning the content, simplifying the handling until the jar meets the shelf price they want and the nutritional value you expect no longer matches. Honey is supposed to be more than sweetness. It should bring something steady, something grounding, something that respects the body rather than rushing it. But when a jar is built purely for cost, that promise evaporates. A low price may tempt the hand, but it empties the honey. A bargain that gives you nothing is not a bargain at all. After opening these jars, one thing becomes clear: honey in the UK shelves is not failing because of one mistake, but because of a system that rewards speed, uniformity, and low cost more than honesty or nourishment. Yet not every jar follows that path. A few makers still treat honey as food, not as a commodity, to be softened, filtered, or stretched. They protect the pollen, keep the heat low, and let the landscape decide the flavor. Those are the jars worth keeping close. So now let us turn to the producers who still hold the line and deserve your trust. 6. Hilltop Welsh Raw Honey. Hilltop Welsh Raw. Honey stands apart the moment you open it. Nothing rushes. Nothing tries to behave perfectly smoothly. The honey settles in its own time, holding the structure that only comes from low intervention handling. That alone says something important, because raw Welsh honey does not need tricks to please the eye. It is allowed to be itself, and that honesty is the first sign you are dealing with a very different jar from the ones we have opened so far. Hilltop works with small Welsh producers who keep their processing simple. The honey is strained, not stripped. It is warmed gently only when absolutely necessary, never pushed to the temperatures that erase enzymes and flatten aroma. Most of the pollen remains carrying the imprint of the local landscape: clover, bramble, heather, wildflowers, depending on the region. With that pollen comes diastase activity, fragrance, and the soft complexity that industrial filtration removes for the sake of uniformity. Here the uniformity is found in commitment, not manipulation. For someone over 50, this makes a difference that is more than poetic. Raw honey tends to rise in the bloodstream more slowly, partly because its natural elements remain intact. The body recognizes the structure, the enzymes, the traces of pollen, the compounds that modulate inflammation. A spoon of raw honey does not behave like the fast sweetness in cheaper blends. It lands gently, steadies more easily, and supports digestion rather than asking the stomach to take the full hit all at once. It is still sugar. No jar can change that, but it is sugar presented with balance. Another strength lies in traceability. Hilltop's Welsh range does not rely on the vague, world-splitting labels that hide more than they explain. The honey comes from defined areas of Wales with clear beekeeping practices, and the route from hive to jar is short and visible. When a product is this transparent, you gain more than information. You gain confidence that every step in the chain respects the honey rather than reshaping it to fit a supermarket strategy. But fairness matters, and a good jar deserves honest scrutiny. Raw honey is not perfect for everyone. It crystallizes naturally, which some shoppers mistake as spoilage. It can feel firm in cooler kitchens, requiring a warm spoon or a little patience. Raw batches also vary slightly in flavor from season to season, reflecting real weather and real forage conditions. People accustomed to the engineered sameness of commercial honey may find that inconsistency surprising. And the price sits higher than the budget options it has to. Low intervention honey costs more to produce, more to test, and more to transport without resorting to shortcuts. There is also the limitation of scale. Small Welsh producers cannot supply the entire country. When weather is poor or forage is thin, yields drop. Hilltop chooses to keep quality steady rather than dilute batches with imported honey, which means availability can tighten. Some shoppers may not find it in stock year-round, and that scarcity can feel inconvenient compared to a supermarket jar that never disappears. These drawbacks do not erase the strengths, but they do provide perspective. Raw honey is not designed for speed, uniformity, or ultra-low pricing. It is built on patience, craft, and the landscape itself. And that is exactly why it stands out. You know what you are getting. You taste what nature produced. And your body receives more than sweetness. It receives something grounded and steady, something left intact rather than engineered. Hilltop Welsh Raw. Honey gives you the landscape, not the factory. A jar that earns its place in your kitchen because it keeps the parts of honey that matter. 7 Rose British Wildflower. Rose's British Wildflower honey begins with a promise most jars on the shelf never make, telling you exactly where it comes from. No global blends. No two-continent loopholes. No world-split phrasing that hides more than it explains. This jar declares its identity upfront: British honey built from British nectar, and that clarity does something powerful before the lid even turns. It gives you a starting point you can trust. With Rose's Wildflower range, the story does not drift through dozens of handlers or distant processing plants. The honey is gathered from defined UK regions, tested in batches, and released only after the company verifies floral markers, moisture levels, and HMF readings. Each test is simple on its own, but together they build a profile that proves what the label claims. And that is something you feel when you taste it. The flavor stays steady, the texture moves predictably, and your body receives the same composition each time. This dependability matters more than most shoppers realize. Honey built on a single national source carries a unified nectar pattern. A body over 50 responds better to that kind of consistency. There are fewer sharp shifts in glucose behavior because the sugar profile does not jump from one floral landscape to another. Digestion settles more easily because the nectar traits remain familiar. Even the gentle comfort that honey brings, a soft steadiness across the morning, becomes more reliable when the jar does not surprise you from one week to the next. Another strength sits quietly behind the scenes: batch verification. Before the honey reaches the supermarket, it goes through a testing step that checks whether the pollen spectrum matches wildflower sources and whether handling stayed within safe, low alteration boundaries. This is not about being raw. It is not about being artisanal. It is about being honest. Rouse wants the composition to say the same thing as the label, and that effort removes the guesswork consumers have been forced to absorb in so many other jars. And yet fairness requires looking at the whole picture. Monofloral-leaning honeys, even when collected across Britain, can shift slightly in taste between seasons. Weather changes nectar output. Soil changes the floral weight. Someone expecting an identical flavor every time may notice small variations, not because of blending, but because of nature. There is also the matter of texture. Rose filters more cleanly than raw honey producers, which means you lose the depth and grain that some people enjoy. For buyers who love richness, this jar may feel too polished. Price is another consideration. It sits above budget honey, and for a reason. Testing costs money. Local sourcing costs money. Keeping honey inside national borders instead of sweeping through cheaper global markets comes with a price tag. Supporters of Rose view that cost as an investment in transparency. Others may hesitate when a cheaper bottle sits close by. Either response is understandable. What matters is knowing what those prices reflect. Still, the advantages remain clear. Rose British Wildflower offers a level of predictability that helps older bodies feel settled rather than challenged. A declared origin removes uncertainty. Batch testing removes doubt. A stable floral identity removes surprise. The honey still behaves like honey sweet warming familiar, but it behaves with a steadiness that the body can trust. There is a quiet reassurance in that. No performance, no engineered smoothness, no global patchwork behind the scenes. Just honey gathered from one country, checked with intention and presented honestly. A jar built on verification, not vagueness. Honey that tells you what it is and keeps its word. 8. How to choose good honey. Finally, before you buy your next jar of honey, slow down for a moment. Use these rules. They reveal more truth than any marketing word ever will, and they protect your body far better than a shiny label. Rule 1. Choose a jar that tells you where it comes from. Not a continent, not a vague phrase, a specific place. When honey names its country, or even better, a region, you gain a predictable nectar profile. Your body responds to that kind of consistency. The glucose rise is steadier, digestion settles more easily, and your morning energy doesn't swing as sharply. When a label says blend of EU and non-EU honeys, it tells you nothing. And nothing is the worst starting point for anyone over 50 who needs steady foods, not surprising ones. Rule 2. Look for honey treated gently, not engineered to behave perfectly. The more a honey is heated or filtered, the more it loses the natural support older bodies rely on: enzymes, pollen traces, soft antioxidants. When those disappear, the honey becomes little more than fast sugar. Honey that shifts with the seasons, thickens in winter, and softens in warmer rooms is honey that still carries its structure. It does not have to be raw, but it should act alive, not manufactured. Rule 3. Question the bargain. If a jar costs less than a loaf of sliced bread, ask yourself why. True honey is not a cheap product to make. Bees take months to build a season. Beekeepers take care and time. Transport, storage, testing, all of it adds cost. When a jar hits the shelf for around £1, something has been removed to make that price possible. Deep filtration, aggressive standardizing, loss of nutrient depth. A deal becomes a deal only when your body gains something from it, not when the label tricks your wallet. Rule 4. Prefer crystallization, not fear it. Real honey thickens. It settles. It forms tiny grains because pollen is still present. That is not spoilage. It is evidence that the honey has not been stripped. Jars that stay liquid in every season look convenient, but convenience often comes from heat and heavy processing, not integrity. Let crystallization be a sign of life, not a flaw. Rule 5. Read the texture, not the promises. Slight variations in color and flow signal a natural product. A jar that is perfectly clear, perfectly runny, perfectly smooth all year often signals intervention. Ignore words like finest, pure, or premium. They describe the branding, not the honey. Your eyes will tell you more in 3 seconds than the front of the label will tell you in 10 minutes. Rule 6. Fewer steps mean fewer losses. When honey is produced close to home or sourced from a single country, the chain of custody shrinks. There are fewer temperature shifts, fewer transfers, fewer opportunities for the honey to lose its value. A shorter journey means more support for your digestion, your joints, your daily energy. Rule 7. Buy smaller jars, not large bottles. Once opened, honey slowly loses its edge. Smaller jars keep freshness closer and reduce the risk of moisture creeping in. Honey rewards precision, not bulk. In the end, good honey does not need miracles. It only needs honesty about where it comes from, how it was handled, and what it still contains. And once you know these rules, the honey aisle becomes simple to navigate. You will recognize the jars that nourish, not just sweeten. At this point, the honey aisle should look different to you. Not more confusing, but more honest. You've seen how 5 familiar jars drifted far from what most people believe they are. You've also seen that 2 others still carry the weight, structure, and care that real honey demands. And now you hold the tools to judge every jar on any shelf without relying on marketing or promises. This isn't about fear, it's about control. When you understand what goes into a jar, you understand what goes into your body. And for anyone past 50, that clarity matters more than ever. Steadier energy, calmer digestion, fewer surprises from foods you use every day. So the next time you reach for honey, pause. Read it. Test it. Choose the one that earns your trust, not the one that asks for it. Because in the end, the most protective choice is always the informed one.
This video does not promote division within the United States or encourage segregation. All content is presented for the purpose of exploration, analysis, and fostering discussion based on current events, public sentiment, and social trends. We fully respect the United States Constitution and all federal regulations. If today's analysis made you think, drop a comment so we can keep the conversations going. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell so you will never miss our next independent deep dive.